Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start my talk with a question, and that is, when you hear the word melanoma, what do you think of first? Perhaps you think of moles, perhaps you think of sunburn, perhaps you think dermatologist or prevention, skin cancer maybe. Maybe you think of fear, maybe you think of death. I think of all these things, but most importantly for me, I think of family. My brother was diagnosed with a melanoma 2 years ago at the very young age of 26. And although fortunately today he's doing well and he is healthy, it was a very startling experience for my family and myself to go through. Skin cancer is a very serious, very real public health concern, and it really knows no bounds. It affects people of all ages, of all skin colors, and all backgrounds. The statistics are actually pretty impressive, as 1 in 5 people will receive a skin cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. And although some forms of skin cancer are more aggressive than others, melanoma being the most aggressive, skin cancer can be fatal. But if detected earlier, the earlier it's detected, the higher chances of survival for any individual with a skin cancer diagnosis. In an effort to reduce the public health burden of skin cancer, the American Academy of Dermatology has sponsored free public skin cancer screenings throughout this country since 1985. There's a lot of ongoing debate out there about kind of the value of and the utility of these free public skin cancer screenings. As there's really, when I was doing background research for this project, I found very little and even conflicting evidence surrounding the value of skin cancer screenings in general. The United States Preventive Services Task Force even issues a grade of I for insufficient evidence to recommend skin cancer screening clinically, which was pretty shocking for me to find, and I think a lot of people don't even know that. So here I am, an aspiring dermatologist, now with a background in public health and a very personally vested interest in skin cancer prevention and epidemiology. So for my project for the Leadership College, I chose to pursue an evaluation of these free public skin cancer screening events that are hosted on the local level throughout the United States, but for my purposes, I focused on local community level throughout North Carolina. I also sought to do more of a general kind of critical evaluation of the concept of community screening events in general. And so I started off about 1.5 years ago by contacting a local nonprofit organization out of Cary, North Carolina, called the Polka Mama Melanoma Foundation. You see the logo here. And the mission of this organization is to, one, organize and provide these said free public skin cancer screening events in communities throughout North Carolina. Also to raise awareness and education about skin cancer in communities throughout North Carolina. So I had multiple goals for my project, one being to come up with some kind of metric, some kind of objective way to evaluate these screenings and what good they're doing, if any, for the community and the local population. I also really wanted to just kind of characterize and describe the population of people who attend these screenings, because in my background research I found that there's a lot of contention and debate about, are we targeting the right populations through these screenings? So I wanted to get my hands on data that I could, being through this organization, to see exactly who we're targeting. So I got IRB approval through UNC Chapel Hill to recruit and screen participants over a 9-month observational study period. And I collected data using a survey that I developed on my own during screening events. And I also used the standardized AAD screening form, which I'm sure our dermatologists in the audience are familiar with. The AAD provides these forms. So participants would attend one of our screenings and be screened by a board-certified dermatologist, sometimes PAs, and usually they were locally recruited private practice dermatologists. The screenings took place either in a clinical practice setting, or some took place aboard the amazing Shuttle, which you can see here. It's an old school bus turned mobile screening unit. So that was a pretty fun experience. It has an exam room inside and a waiting room. This is me at a Duke women's basketball game last February, where we hosted a screening event. So we chose kind of interesting different settings for them. Then about 6 weeks after each screening event, I personally called all the participants to administer a telephone follow-up survey with particular questions that I wanted to ask post-screening. Namely, if you had been told you have a suspicious lesion on your skin, did you follow up with a dermatologist or not for biopsy? So here's just a picture of, you can't really read it, but just so you have an idea of what my survey that I created and got approved to administer during screenings looks like. So to talk about the results a little bit, between August 2017 and May 2018, we screened a total of 216 individuals over the course of 17 screening events. And among these participants, 80% of them were Caucasian, 60% were female, and the average age was 46 years old. Among folks who decided to participate in my survey during screening events, just to share some statistics from that, 30% of those individuals had never seen a dermatologist before, meaning 70% had. 10% of those individuals had a personal known history of some kind of skin cancer in the past. 40% of those people who came to screenings reported using sunscreen on a regular basis. I think the average SPF we came up with was 36 SPF averaging. And then 50% of people who came to our screenings reported having used some kind of indoor tanning device in the past. Throughout the course of this study, we detected 250 skin lesions, and the large majority of these, being 40% of those lesions, were suspected benign lesions, being like the spot you see, not the red, on the left, the regular looking circular brown spot, like a benign nevi or nevus or a mole, basically. And only 6% of lesions detected were suspected skin cancers, being melanoma, which I think 1% was, and then basal cell or squamous cell carcinomas. Of the people we screened, 52 individuals were recommended to follow up with a dermatologist. And among those 52, I was only able to get in contact with 12 by phone. And then among those 12, I talked to 8 people who had been followed up by a dermatologist and had their lesion biopsied. And among those biopsy results, patient reported, of course, I didn't have pathology reports to look at. Most of them were benign lesions. I found 3 basal cell carcinomas and 1 squamous cell carcinoma. So consistent with very few prior studies kind of looking at the same thing, most of our screening participants did fall into the classic category of screening participants being Caucasian, female, adults, mostly over the age of 50 years old. I encountered a lot of difficulty in performing this evaluation of free public skin cancer screenings, namely data collection limitations being a high number of loss to follow-up. So I tried to call all 216 individuals, but I was only able to get in touch with 52. Those aren't great statistics. I also recognize that this is an observational study, and that means that there are a lot of biases inherent in a study like this, namely self-report bias from people reporting answers to questions and actions that they've done. So all of these limitations collectively interfere with my ability to do a good data analysis, and they also really severely lower the kind of statistical conclusion validity of any results I could come up with. But nevertheless, I can feel certain that community screening events as such will continue to be hosted under the assumption, and I'm not talking only dermatology skin screenings, all kinds of screening events, under the assumption that there is some kind of inherent and implicit value in such events. But what I can't be sure of, and what one major impetus for this project was, is that some kind of consistent evaluative strategy will be used to come up with an objective way to evaluate how effective these screening events are in terms of improving public health. Something else I wanted to talk about is kind of the ethics of free skin cancer screenings. So again, in doing my background research, I found that the concept of free skin cancer screenings to the public is highly debated from an ethics standpoint. A lot of people contend that these events are a ploy for dermatologists to drum up more business and to get more patients to come to them in their private practice setting after being screened in one of these community events. However, at the same time, I found some literature discussing how a given dermatologist could defend his or her decision to participate in one of these screenings from an ethical standpoint. One of these approaches being the utilitarian approach, being that screenings are a reasonable distribution of resources, being time of a dermatologist, because it provides the greatest good to the greatest number of people. Another ethics-based approach I came across was the justice-based proposition. And this says that skin cancer screenings, again, are sound because they are providing care, being dermatologic care, to a population of people who may otherwise go underserved and not receive dermatologic screening or care. And that brought me to showing you all this map. It comes from the AAD website. It's interactive, and if you were to click around on their website, you would find that only 30 states in our country have such free skin cancer screening events in the course of a given year. And those states that do offer these kinds of events, they're usually only offered at one time in one location throughout the course of a year. And so that brings me to say that we have somewhat of a dermatology access problem in our country. And granted, this isn't private practice or academic dermatology. This is free skin cancer screening standpoint. So in the future, kind of further in conclusion, I think it's important to continue to recognize and study challenges associated with community screening events, not only skin cancer screening, but also other types of more primary care related screenings. And it's also important for future studies to continue to attempt to objectively kind of quantify and evaluate such events so that we know what good, if any, they're doing for our communities. And meanwhile, in the setting of skin cancer rates being on the rise, that's a whole separate issue. I think it's important for healthcare providers of all kinds in all clinical settings. It's incumbent upon them to inspire a culture of skin cancer awareness and education among patients. So thank you. That's all.